Hi guys, welcome to Financial Reporting. The aim of these lectures, if you like, are to act as an aid to the classes. You can use them as flip learning. That's really my plan, to use them as flip learning where you get to listen to them before the class or you can listen to them after the class, but you have them as a reference point so that you always have something to go back to, if you like, and to use. And I'm going to be making these videos. They're the same videos I'm going to use in discussing class, but just as an additional resource. And I'm also going to make videos on the questions or the related questions to these areas. Right, so for F7 we're starting off with consolidated because I always like, because really it's because of this. There are three sections in your exam: the section A, B, and C. Now section C, they tell us very clearly in the syllabus tells us that you will have two long case questions, two 20-mark questions. So that's 40 marks already. And those are typically the last, whatever, 4, 5, 6 chapters in the textbook. And those cover consolidated financial statements, and those also cover interpretation of financial statements. So you want to, if you're here now, I'm sure you've spent some time looking at ratio analysis, and comparing, and this is something we come to do again. And you might even have some interpretation of a group, but that's nothing really crazy. It's just the fact that you're really looking at the situation, how things were before the group, they've now joined as a group, and you're recalculating the ratios, and again you're comparing prior to being a group and after being a group, and you might have had some events occurring that have caused those transactions to cause, if you like, to yield different ratios. So that's kind of why we always start off with chapter 17. And then it means you're also working on these throughout for the whole year, or for the whole, whatever, 12 weeks of the course, as opposed to just waiting towards the end of the year because it's at the end of the chapter or the end of the course. Great. So let's jump into it. Chapter 16 and 17 really talk about this concept of a group, discussing a group as a single economic unit. And we'll carry on, we'll discuss. So let's just go through the objectives. What is the point of these consolidated financial statements? We're going to be looking at that. IFRS 10 is our guide. If you like, it almost states the rules and the structure behind what defines a group. And then we do have some instances where you do not have to consolidate certain subsidiaries, if you like, but they're not many of those. There are a few, and we're going to see those as well. And we sort of see, again, like same sort of leading on from that, there are reasons why you may wish not to consolidate, and see what's going on over there. Well, there's this sort of discussion, as you can imagine you're a parent company and you have subsidiaries. I mean, you could have subsidiaries in a different country. There is no natural law that you would have the same year ends. So the argument is that, imagine trying to consolidate two companies where one has a year end of December and one has a year end of June, or something along those lines. So there are rules to a certain extent as to how you consolidate this scenario. Right, and then we later on, not in this first video of course, we will talk about this issue of eliminating intra-group transactions, and that's really where we're that's kind of the very first sort of chapter. This first video is going to look at that. So let's go. What is a group? What is a group? So fundamentally, the rule is that if a company owns more than 50% of the ordinary shares of another company, the issue really here, as you can imagine, is control. So if you control another company, and typically the traditional idea behind control, although we'll see, and I'll give you some examples as to why this isn't, this is your standard way of thinking about it, but just think about the evolution of financial engineering and the raising of money. So things in reality are not quite this black and white, but this is a fair premise, and this is the premise you will get in your exam. That a company that owns more than 50% of the ordinary shares of another company is fundamentally in control of that second company. So because typically the majority, if you had more than 50%, you had voting power to appoint, if you like, to do things, if you like, to call a general election, to call an annual general meeting, to if you like, direct strategy, if you like, of the organization to choose whether it's going to be a dividend or not. You have power. You could pull out you could sack all the executive directors. You could bring in some non-executive directors. So there's an element of power there that gives you control. Now the argument really here is this: if you are in control of something, they're fundamentally a department within your organization. I mean, if you think about it, when we discuss organizational structure, you will have a holding company, for example, or you could just have head office, and you can have divisions in different countries, or you could have products, different products. Um, if you like, as your kind of divisional geographical structure, and all that is part of one big company. Most of the time these divisions don't speak to each other, and they just carry on with their business and reward, and then you just prepare accounts for everything. And what in essence is being argued here is that when you own more than 50% in a company, you are pretty much in that same if you like, picture. And so they are in effect one unit. And so the whole organization should be regarded as a single unit. The key point here is that they're fundamentally, I think this is the key point, become a department. So we should stop thinking of them as companies, even though that is what they are in the legal sense, but in effect, they are just, if you like, departments. And hopefully that helps you start to understand gradually why people say things like you have to eliminate intra-group transactions, because if you're one whole group, if you like, and you're one company, if you think about it, when you if one division here sells to another division here, well, really we can't call that revenue, because revenue must be, if you like, transactions external to the entire organization. So we cannot be recording intra-group revenue transactions. We cannot be we can't show intra-group loans, and all intra-group transactions have to end, if you like, and all intra-group profits made also have to kind of really just disappear, because we are interested in the external transactions to the whole group. Great stuff. Okay, right. I'm going to always try and keep these videos quite short. I'm going to try, even if I have to make a few parts so that they're watchable. So typically we have three IFRSs that guide us. We'll probably spend a lot of time looking at IFRS 10. You don't need to know the IFRSs, but we do have three of them that guide the preparation of consolidated financial statements. And like I said earlier on, each company in a group prepares its own financial records. This is very normal, if you like, and we'll see why this is, because you don't typically always own 100% of this company. You might own 70%. So the question is, the company still has a responsibility, if you like, of preparing its accounts to these 30% that will come to here as your non-controlling interest. Once upon a time, they used to be called minority interests, and that's what they are. Right. So for the individual companies, financial statements, the parent. So you have the parent. It is the parent that prepares these consolidated financial statements. And these are some nice definitions here. You have what's referred to as the parent. This is the entity that controls one or more entities. You have a subsidiary. This is, if you like, think of the parent, and the subsidiary is this former company, now a department within the organization. And then, well, I guess this idea of control. Now, what I said earlier on, I said things have evolved. The idea of owning 50% of the shares isn't always is fair. What you guys are going to get in your exam at this level. An investor controls an investee when the investor is exposed or has rights to variable returns from its involvement with the investee, and has the ability to affect those returns through its power over the investee. And I've talked about this issue of power. So you could have 40% and still be in control, because you have this, all the other shareholders are so dispersed that you would still be considered to be in control, to affect, if you like, when we say variable returns, deciding on dividend policy, that sort of thing. So, but for you guys, it's 50%. Okay, great. And as I mentioned earlier on, our focus is on IFRS 10. IFRS 10 highlights, if you like, the rules or the guiding rules behind this. So consolidated financial statements should be prepped when the parent company has control over the subsidiary. And like I've said earlier on, for exam purposes, it'll always be more than 50%. Now, just to make it a bit more real, I highlighted here that most organizations now have several classes of the ordinary share. So you have a class A, class B, and even a class C of shares at ordinary share level. And look at this, Facebook is one. You can see here Facebook has a controlling interest. Mark Zuckerberg has a controlling interest of the social media giant. He only owns 18% of the company's Class B shares. So I mean, he's raised funds and he only has 18%. So as far as the funding is concerned, he has 18%. But then that's because you see here for them. What's the word? Your Class B shares carry 10 votes per share, whilst your Class A just carry 1 vote per share. So they've found a way to engineer a structure where it is no longer the sort of assumption that each vote carries. I'm sorry, each share has 1 vote. Well, at Class A, but then there's Class B, that where you have other privileges, and this still enables Mr. Zuckerberg to maintain control because again, it's still very much about voting power. Um, so there you are, and then you have that. Google have something similar. Alphabet Inc. actually, parent company of Google, and you might, if you're into tech and you're interested in this sort of thing, these are the founders: Larry Page, Sergey and Eric Schmidt, and they have controlling interest, owning 60% of the company's B voting shares that carry 10 votes per share. So you can see in contrast, their Class A shares only carry 1 vote per share, and you can have Class C and there are no voting rights at all, right? So that almost feel akin to preference shares almost somewhat. Okay, great stuff. Control is identified again, like I say, this is just repeating, but I'm going through all the slides because it's important. It's about power over the investee. Again, this exposure to rights and, if you like, the ability to use your power. Forgive me if this is repeating what I just said earlier on, but it's better to just go through the whole thing. It won't take too long. And exercising, well, yes, it's a standard, isn't it? So these are all the little things. We're basically extracting the key points from it. Exercise of the majority of voting rights, contractual arrangements, and again, this kind of highlights what I was saying earlier on. You may hold less than 50%, but where you have this dispersion and unconnected nature of the other shareholders who don't have any power, who can't actually affect any kind of change, you are still very much in control. And what we were talking about here, having linking voting rights to a certain class of shares. Now, I'll stop at 15 minutes. I'll always stop at 15 minutes. Right. So I said earlier on, you can't exclude, you can't say, okay, listen, A, B, C, D, these are all my subsidiaries. B didn't do well this year, so we're going to exclude it. B, go on your own. No, that can't happen. You have to include it if you have control of it, if you like. Because as you can imagine, overall, it will weigh down your earnings per share when we come to look at that. When I say earnings per share, just imagine just whatever your net profit, so to speak, is divided by the total number of shares. And of course, you can imagine why people would, even for natural reasons, why you want to include the companies that haven't done well. And you can't, I mean, even though they are taking on different activities that are completely to yours, I mean, we have what's referred to as conglomerates, right? And this is a strategic choice in terms of you going out there and you kind of acquiring, forgive me, different types of companies. So you can have companies that are doing very different things to you from a strategic point of view, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you still have to, you can't use that as an excuse for exclusion. But there are, which kind of makes sense, there are conditions where you can exclude. So for example, if you have A, B, C, and D, for example, A, yes, controls B and C, but if A is already going to be within C, A does not need to start preparing consolidators for B, C, D. No, C does it. So the key point is, to save us all this paperwork and all this drama, C will be the company that does the prep. A does not have to kind of go ahead and start carrying out a consolidation for B, C, and D. The other reason here is that if you're not trading on a public market, because ultimately it does feel like it's a private company, then ultimately, um, I mean, what am I saying? It's a private limited company then. So it really is at the in your constitution, or at the if you like, the wisdom, if you like, of the shareholders or stakeholders to whether or not you have um, consolidated accounts or not. But otherwise, there shouldn't be this shouldn't be, as long as you're not being trading on the public market on its stock exchange, then then you don't have to. Great. I said I'll stop at 15 minutes, and we'll take a break there, and we'll move on to part two.